People who quit their jobs without a backup plan, what happened next? 20 years ago, I was managing restaurants in Tampa and got burned out. Company had been good to me, so I told them I was giving them 3 months' notice. Enough time to hire and train my replacement. Did not have a backup, was just done dealing with it all. Word spread up the ladder that I was leaving. President of the concept asked what it would do to get me to stay. Told him I wanted a 9-to-5 job. So they made a job for me at the corporate office as a junior analyst, and I began a new career. Story 2. I took a vacation, and with the help of a former colleague, I found another one within a week of looking. This was 11 years ago. I don't think I would be so lucky today. Story 3. My grandfather happened to be near the end of his life, so I used him as an excuse to get out of a crappy job before I could get fired. Bit of a long story there. To keep myself occupied, I helped out at my mom's school and volunteered in the library. I really enjoyed it, so I went to college for library science. It was a 2-year degree, but I took an accelerated program that completed the program in 1 year. Now, library work is a passion of mine and some of the most fulfilling work I've ever done. Story 4. I had ample savings and decided I wanted to take a chance and pursue my passion. I put in my 2 weeks' notice, worked my butt off, and left. I took a day to reset after 60 to 70-hour weeks for years, and then started applying to jobs I thought I would enjoy, but was having a hard time finding them. After about 3 weeks, I finally got an offer for my dream job as a financial advisor, but had to get licensed. I had been investing for years and studying finance, and passed the licensing tests and exams in about 2 months, living off savings and dedicating 100% of my time to studying and training. The first year was extremely tough and nothing at all like I expected. I was struggling to adapt to what I thought the job was, people coming to me, versus what it was, having to prospect and earn every bit of business. I almost quit at the end of the year when I'd ran my liquid savings down to my last few $100s and actually interviewed for another job that was salaried and offered a much lower amount than I interviewed for, so I turned it down. I was depressed, in debt. My friends and family provided almost no support. My GEF at the time left me, and I began getting counseling because I felt like a total failure. I met my now wife during that time, and her and my mentor on my team convinced me to give 100% for a couple more months, and that if I still wasn't having success, that they would help me find another career. Then things just started clicking. I started not trying to convince people to work with me, just explaining what I do, and if they wanted to talk further, great. If not, they had my information. I got a few decent clients, and they loved what I did for them. And then I decided I was going to stick it out to not let them down, since I joined the industry to help people. If I had left, who was going to help them the way I did? Many people in this industry are greedy and only in it for the money, selling products people don't need to make commissions and that don't actually help them financially. Since then, I've consistently been a top performer. My clients love me and refer me a lot of business. I've won multiple awards, and I've really focused on giving back. I'm working my dream job, married to my best friend who I never thought existed, and donate almost half of what I make to multiple local nonprofits and charities. My wife was recently able to leave her job and take a pay cut to work at a local nonprofit to further help our goal of helping others. 90+% of my business is from referrals, and I've expanded my network to include many influential people in their industries. I'm living a life I could only have dreamed of years ago, and I'm able to help many people that I wasn't in a position to help only a few years ago. My friends and family respect me. My clients love me. I'm one of the top advisors on my team, and my business is growing exponentially. It was a lot of work, a lot of risk, and a lot of stress. People see me now and tell me how lucky I am, but they didn't see all of the sleepless nights, all of the rejection I faced, and how hard it was knowing that I was only a month or 2 away from potentially losing my house and everything I'd worked for. I had been putting in 10, 12-hour days, working 6 to 7 days a week, and I outworked almost everyone around me. I understand that I'm an exception and would never advise anyone to do what I did, but it also helped me to pursue my passion without having a plan B, since failure was not an option. I am an extremely hard worker, do not take vacations, and dedicate my time to helping others, whether or not I get paid for it. Story 5. Which time? I've ended up homeless, I've bounced back, I've lost years to depression, and never once regretted a single job I quit. Not for a second. Story 6. I was working a job that was going downhill, at least for me. I had a pretty significant family event occur recently and was called in to provide some off-hours support. I met someone I had never seen around before, and when he asked for my phone number, I refused to provide it. It turned out he was some new upper management type and was pretty mad about the interaction. They decided to put me and a few other engineers onto a rotating 24/7 shift to help with a project that wasn't going well, but simultaneously told us not to change anything. So basically, I had to be there overnight, but I wasn't allowed to actually do anything if anything went wrong. Mind you, this was at the start of pandemic, and they had also given everyone a pay cut and stopped contributing to 401ks. I started looking for jobs, had some interviews, and one was a good fit and went well. I was told that they were interested in having me come for further interviews, but nothing had been planned out yet. Finally, I had had enough of the new schedule at my current job, so I put in my 2 weeks. They terminated me the next day. Don't think they realized that by not letting me work the 2 weeks, I would be eligible for unemployment. I didn't have a definitive plan at that point, but I had some money to tide me over for a few months, and I had had a lot of leads on other roles, so I wasn't too worried about finding more work. Over the next month or so, things with the job I had interviewed for progressed. They flew me down for an in-person interview, and about 2 months later, I got an offer. I negotiated starting after the new year, gave me more time to pack and move, and gave me some time off before changing to a new role. That time off was the best time of my entire life. It's hard to describe the weight that was off my shoulders. Being able to get up at any time of day, take my dog for a walk in the park in the middle of the day, and it was awesome. I sometimes lost track of what day of the week it was. Story 7. I don't regret leaving my job because it was the most toxic work environment. However, I left $95K salary with the support of my spouse, saying it was the right thing to do for my health. I'm 2 months out of work, been looking since week 2, put in over 150 applications, 3 interviews ghosted by 1, and turned down for the other 2, saying I was overqualified. Eye roll, hopefully soon. Story 8. I've done this a few times. Aged in 2009, I quit my retail job on the spot. Lived with parents, so it was okay. Claimed unemployment benefits for a little while. Had to give that all to my mom. And got a job after about 4 months. I quit that job without a backup in 2011. I was living on my own, but had savings and cheap rent. Found another job within a few weeks, quit that after 2 weeks, found another job a week after that. I had a wonderful 3 weeks of no work, rent paid, money in the bank for food, etc. And I just did whatever the duck I wanted because I had a start date for a new job. I slept and woke up when I wanted, did art projects, worked out, watched movies, hung out with friends. Didn't really spend much money, but it was so carefree and wonderful. Then I matured and basically stayed in work, applying for internal jobs and getting them until 2016, and I quit suddenly. I gave an extended notice period of 2 months. I was married, had a mortgage, pretty cheap one though, TBF, and savings, but my wife was a student at the time. That's why I gave longer notice. I was unemployed for 5 weeks. I haven't quit a job without anything lined up since. I'm very tempted at the moment, as I hate my current job, but it pays way more than I think I could earn elsewhere. Plus, we now have kids and a bigger mortgage to think about. Plus, the job market is brutal right now. I have savings we could live on for a year, but I don't want to squander the money in that way. We have big plans for that money. I need to knuckle down and get my CV updated, work on applications and interview skills, but it's so hard to do when you're tired from the crap job and your home life responsibilities. Quitting without anything else lined up is okay if you savings and a way to minimize your outgoings. Otherwise, don't ducking do it, especially not these days. Story 9. I quit my first real job. I did everything wrong professionally, had no parents to lead me through it, and took advice from out-of-touch boomer teachers. During the interview, per instructed advice, then I severely under-negotiated my wages, because once I showed how great I was, we can revisit and adjust. I asked for $12 an hour to be a machinist. Immediately took off. First job. Young. Full of energy and ambition. I knew how to program raw G-code and adjusted the way the machines went through steps. Instead of resetting at home, they just pulled back with enough space, changed tools and returned. Cut down minutes apart in an environment that made $300 a day per person. Promoted to programmer and moved into quality control. I say promoted because no raise. And if they needed someone running a machine, I'd get pulled out of QC and put back on a lathe. I fought for a raise. Owner really liked me. He kind of struck gold. During the meeting, my manager walks in, says I shouldn't get the raise. At your age, I never made that much money. Owner still took pity on me, raised me $14 because any more would raise flags in the system. Took forever to give it to me and scoffed when I asked if I'd get the difference retroactively. New guy got hired just for QC. I asked him how much he made, around $14.50, called in sick the next week. Went to some job fairs. Didn't even get an offer, just promising leads. Came in on Wednesday and said Friday was my last day. Was unemployed for a month until one of the places called back out of nowhere. Got a new job for $20. The look on the owner's face. If you had stayed, we could have gotten you to 20. It'd just take years of you sticking around. Hindsight is interesting. They clearly were mentoring me to eventually take a management role. Unfortunately, saw me as a kid and didn't respect me for what I did for them. Story 10. Quit because I was burnt out, went to Amsterdam, did substances, had psychosis, didn't treat it for 8 months, became schizophrenia, fell into catatonic state, then had a mild stroke, was put on early retirement for life. Story 11. I got another offer immediate, but it was in Iraq and didn't ship out for 6 months. In the meantime, I burned through 2/3 of my savings while looking for a job that paid more not to go to Iraq. I wound up landing one that paid less, not to go to Iraq, but only 10K less, and I decided that was worth it. But relocating to the Bay Area cleaned out the rest of my savings account. So hard reset my savings, which was previously 20K. Then I've been going on trips once every 2 months ever since then, so I haven't saved anything back up, and it's been a year. Until last month, when I finally was going to carry over about 4K from that month to this one before getting my first check, which would have been great. I would have had like 7 or 8K by the end of this month, starting out that strong. But spectacularly, my car broke down and cost, wouldn't you know it, about 3K to fix. So I should have a few thousand to put in my savings account by the end of this month, for the first time since August last year. Thanks, car. Oh, but already planning another trip in September. It's an LDR killing me here. Also, realistically, at the Iraq job, I would be stuck living in a company villa in Iraq with 0 effective living expenses for 10 months out of the year. So like 80% or that income would be disposable. So, with that considered, it pays functionally more like 60K more than living in the Bay, with most of my pay going to living expenses. If it had a shorter rotation, I would have taken it. And no trip, story 12, I got a raise and quit. Technically, I was in events and was paid hourly, so I made a ton of out. New GM started, old GM was from our state, just getting us started. Was told by old GM. Owner, my boss in HR, not to mess with my contract because I was doing like 3 people jobs. It was special events in Vegas, casino interfacing, websites, training. I had a lot of institutional knowledge, and they had to massage the finances to hire me. The new GM decided I made too much and made me a salary employee, which cut my pay. I stayed with the new GM and my boss, who didn't want me to quit, and my boss was talking to the owner, but they didn't want to contradict the new GM. So I just quit in a meeting with him, just walked out. I had told my wife I might do it, but I was surprised I ended up quitting. I had 0 plan. I went back to school for a month part-time, but kept looking for a job. Luckily, I heard through an old contact a casino was looking for help growing their marketing events department. Interviewed with the local team, but what cinched it was their New York office didn't want to hire anyone. The casino staff personally recommended they wanted an outsider to keep an eye on their investment. They also paid me double what I made at the other place. The other place ended up creating 3 positions to do my job and kept hiring and firing people till they shut down. At their Christmas party, the GM told me he made a mistake letting me go, and the company suffered without me there. Story 13. Left a job for what I thought was going to be a superior job and experience. Was very wrong and got into a shouting match with my boss around the 6-month mark and quit on the spot. I went back to my old job with my tail between my legs and asked for my position back, and thankfully, they gave it to me. Was among the more humbling experiences of my life. Story 14. After 13 years, my wife wanted to move back home that was 900 miles away. Had been working with a realtor long distance to secure a house a couple of doors away from a family member. After a family purchased our house when a previous deal had fallen through for them, we thought we had enough saved up until the bank demanded 40% down on the new house because neither of us had job prospects. After cashing in some stocks, we were just able to meet the asking price for the new house, packed up our belongings into a large U-Haul van, put the second vehicle on the tow hitch, and my wife followed me with our 4 kids and 3 cats to Wisconsin in January. Day before we arrived, there was a snowstorm. Nearly 16 inches of fresh snow met us when we pulled in. It was the day before final signing. Luckily, the previous owners allowed us to move a few critical items into the house before we took possession. I started looking for a position a week after we moved in. First interview was okay, but the offered salary was below expectations. Second job interview went much better, was hired on the spot, and ended up working for 23 years until pandemic terminated my employment. All in all, it was crazy to move to a new home without a job prospect. But what can I say? Love does crazy things to you. Story 15. I was being severely underpaid at a state government job. I had been there for 6 years and had no hope for raises or advancement. I was the subject matter expert and had trained everyone on the team, boss included, that all made more than me. I grew increasingly frustrated that no matter how much work I did, there was never going to be any reward or recognition. I knew I was stagnating and hated the feeling. I typed up a resignation letter and slid it across the table at a meeting with my boss. I had a couple weeks of terror and regret, realizing the gravity of what I did. Started applying to anything and everything. Interviewed for a grocery store job, car assembly line job, and a cell phone sales job, among others. I ended up taking a random job at an insurance call center. That lasted for 2 weeks before I landed a job in my actual field, making 66% more than what I made at my original job. Lessons. Quitting without a plan was a dumb move. It worked out in the end, but it could have easily not. 2. All jobs and all work have value and deserve respect. When looking for a job, you appreciate that more. 3. Know your value. If you know you can do better, go find it. Don't let yourself stagnate, and don't accept being undervalued. Story 16. I just did this. I left a perfectly good job with the feds and accepted a position with a very large engineering company. I was told in my interview that I set the schedule. If I wanted to work 5x8s, 4x10s, or 5x10s, whatever, my choice. I asked for a lot and they never even hiccuped, just approved my request and onboarded me. I got on site and the project was 5 years behind schedule. The client wanted 6x10s. My role was different from what I had agreed to, and I was going to be living out of hotels for 11.5 months out of the year. My third day on site, I started making phone calls to people I'd worked with previously. Some calls were made on my behalf to numerous companies, and I had a call back from a VP in a couple of days. I walked off the job, headed into the 04 Jewel weekend, forwarded my docs to the VP, jumped through some hoops, and signed my new offer last week. I start on Monday. Not quite 2 months, start to finish. It helps I had a good chunk of money put away, received about $11K for my accrued leave paid out, and had about 3 pay periods with the new company before resigning. I'm taking a massive cut in pay, 45%-ish, but the schedule and QOL was what I was after. Story 17. I was 27 working at a gas station as assistant manager. I dropped out of school and worked retail the whole time. Got management training and then promptly burnt out and quit with $4,500 to my name. I used that money to go to Mexico. I was lucky enough to be living in a spare house on my aunt's property with my sister just paying off renos we had done for $300 a month, so wasn't too worried about what I would do when I got back. I decided to try camming. I worked out, lots of money coming in. Then, a couple months later, the 2 houses flooded and I lost everything. Moved into a lady's basement. That didn't work out. No privacy and no respect of my space. So I was moving again after 3 months. I told a regular guy I'd been cam to cam with for 2 weeks that I wouldn't be available, and he offered to help me move. I didn't have much, but I needed support. He booked a ticket right away, and 2 weeks later, he was there. He bought me basically everything I needed to start over. We dated long distance, me in Canada and him in USA, for 3 years. And now we have been married for 6 years, living my best life. I sell houseplants as a house cat. Story 18. I stopped having panic attacks and got my life together, got new job and moved to a better place closer to old friends and family. Place nearly drove me to an early grave and I had to get out. I hadn't even started applying to other places when I resigned, so the first week out was getting the resume together. Second week was getting interview clothes and printing off says resumes. Then a few months of job hunting before I landed a perfect job. I even turned down some offers, as they would have made the career path more difficult or been nearly as toxic to my health. During the job hunt, I also got help for the anxiety induced by the place I left, started a workout routine, and got my sleep back on track. Once I realized the new job was solid, I was able to find a new apartment that brought me much closer to home. I finally worked normal hours and could sleep again, so I had time and energy for social things. The new job was higher salary too, so my partner and I could afford a slightly larger place and have people over. Story 19. This was 2006 or 2007 timeframe. I was not paid for 3 checks in a row. 6 weeks. I was the only employee remaining in the US, as they had downsized from a group of 10 people. There were multiple computers and a company car that I had the keys to. I stopped coming into the office, but I had the car and a trunk full of laptops. Told them I'd give them back once they paid what I was owed. Was looking for work even before the first check didn't come. So almost 3 months had been looking, but I had no job and was not being paid. I got a new job about 4 weeks after taking the company car hostage. I was in communication with them regularly during this time. It was not stolen. I returned the laptops, and in exchange for the missed payments they were in, the process is signing over the company car to me as I would buy it for that. They owned me, but it was worth a whole lot more. But they had no intention of dealing with selling it from abroad because they were permanently closing the US office. And I totaled the car 3 weeks after getting signed over me. Story 20. Just did it this year for the first time ever. Worked in a restaurant that lost its manager to pancreatic cancer, and the assistant manager was out for several weeks due to illness and losing her best friend in a car accident. I was the primary supervisor at the time. I worked 60-hour weeks for a month with little to no help from corporate management. I was so stressed that it caused bloody diarrhea. I actually went to a doctor and got prescribed medication because I was barely sleeping from the stress. My wife saw how miserable I was and encouraged me to think about my physical and mental health. So I quit. Day of. Never done that before. I really dislike change. I hated doing that to my coworkers and remaining boss because I always got along well with them. I took a week to relax, then started looking for a new job. Found one a few weeks later working in a prison kitchen. Slightly more pay and about a quarter the work. Got a promotion about a month in. Now I'm making even more money and still a lot less work. Life is so much better. I just wish I hadn't lost my friend to cancer. Story 21. Quit because I was burned out after busting ass for 10 years and only getting to middle management. Super competitive, super toxic environment. After quitting, got pretty depressed. I mainly played video games and smoked for a couple of months. Brother got me a book called $100 Startup or something like that. Got me thinking about my hobbies or things I was good at and whether I could get paid for it. Couldn't figure out how to get paid for smoking, and I wasn't good enough at video games. But after working for the toxic corporation for 10 years, I knew the business, shortcomings and processes, pain points, etc. Started doing research and found that I could resell former companies' services or even partner with their sales teams and get a cut of monthly recurring revenue. Started reaching out to old coworkers and sellers at previous company to offer my services to alleviate pain points. First 6 months, I pulled in $90K as the sole employee. Things started taking off after that. Hired 2 people and then another 2 a few months later. It's almost been 2 years now, and our best year was last month, where we pulled in $163K profit. Story 22. In 1994, I was in a PhD program at Georgia Tech, finishing my first year and really didn't know what I wanted to research. I went from undergrad to PhD and was doing a lot of prereqs while doing the class they were prereqs for. I just wasn't into my job as a research assistant 20 hours a week, and I was exhausted and miserable and unhealthy. I was writing my former college roomie who was in Japan working. He said if I didn't like it, if I was miserable, just quit. So I did, right in the middle of a database class. Mid-quarter, past the drop date, dropped the professor's own textbook in the trash on my way out the door, emailed the prof I worked for that I dropped out, grabbed stuff from my cubicle, and left. Best decision I ever made. I found a job quickly working second shift data entry in a sweatshop environment. It was awful, but I needed to pay rent. I worked it for about 2 months while interviewing in the morning and early afternoon for a career job. Found an awesome job, and I've been at it working with many of the same people for over 30 years now. Story 23. Last time I did this, I had a job teed up. But this was loosely an entry-level office job and not where I was living. So they just sort of stopped responding. I don't think they wanted to pay travel, room and board, etc. So then I quit my job, had a friend with a couch in destination town, and went for it. Once I landed, I let the hiring MGR know I was now in the area. A couple days later, they scheduled an in-person interview. I took the interview, they said they'd let me know, and then they called me 30 minutes later offering me the job. Prior to that, I've walked off a few jobs, mostly low-paying kitchen stuff. I was in college at the time and just focused on schoolwork until the next thing. One time in a restaurant, some doofus was brought to Expo over the weekend. He was the old sous chef. He had an attitude and ego. At one point during the shift, he was criticizing me over something, and I just gave him the finger and left. I don't think I was the only one with an issue. He now makes cheeseburgers for a living. So, story 24. I was a manager at Enterprise, which led to a lot of drinking, was on a bender, and at 6 a.m. decided I had enough. After my friend, who was mega wealthy from selling his company, talked me into quitting because he wanted friend to travel with, haha, I text the area manager I quit. Had zero plan. Took 2 months off. One of my customers reached out on LinkedIn and hired me into a full-time travel role in auto repair financing, making 60% more. Then pandemic hit and everyone was laid off, about 9 months later. Was fun employed for a year and a half during pandemic. My friend that convinced me to quit let me crash in one of his houses during this period. We traveled to like 20 countries during this break. He would always pay for all 10 friends every trip. Learned so much from him that helped me land another full-time travel position in a highly technical area. So I saved a lot and got caught up. The risks paid off big now in my current dream job, making 200K plus, with half the hours of enterprise and not wanting to drink my life away. Story 25. Quit a job of 22 years about 7 years ago. I gave my insane boss 8 weeks notice, and he countered, "You need to give me a year's notice." At that point, I hired an attorney to negotiate my exit. I had equity in the company, so I didn't want to just walk away from that. Looking back, I was probably on the cusp of a heart attack or stroke from the sheer stress of it. The lawyer was $375 an hour, but the best money I ever spent. Old boss ran up the clock, bloviating nonsense to the attorney, but still worth it as I couldn't stand to speak another word to the guy. Ended up negotiating a consulting arrangement on the condition that I'd have no direct contact with crazy boss. 7 years later, I work as much or as little as I feel like for the same company, pretty much only doing the work I enjoy. 2 days a week, I do that work, and the other 3, I'm a professional gardener, a true passion of mine. A lot insecurity and self-doubt along the way, but I feel blessed to be in the situation I am now. Story 26. Almost 2 years ago, I left a job for specific reasons after having worked there for 13 years. By the end of the first month of unemployment, I had an interview at the only job I had applied for. It was with an employer I suspected would be more of the same, but the interview was more about me assessing them than the other way around, and considering I hadn't done a job interview in 13 years, I could have used the practice. After some discussion, I ended the interview early and wished them luck in finding a suitable candidate. For some reason, they called the next week to ask if I was sure about not taking the position. I declined again. The following month, I applied for a position with a different employer in an entirely different field, thinking I could transfer my skills to the position they had available. I got the job and have been thriving there since. They treat me much better. My starting pay was higher than what my previous employer paid me after being there for 13 years, and I was able to retain my status in the same retirement system. Story 27. I had a significant mental breakdown while doing estate debt collection. I barely avoided hospitalization, but was pretty confident. If I finished out my 2 weeks, I would probably end up attempting something drastic. I had enough savings to stall until I could finally line up a part-time job. It had a program that was going to let me go back to college too. I kid you not, the day I was supposed to start was the first day of lockdown in 2020. I was sick with what would turn out to be a cold, but they wouldn't let me come in coughing. I never actually got to start at that company. Instead, I ended up getting help from my then girlfriend, now wife, my family, pandemic stimulus money, and a sizable Pell Grant to go back to school full-time. I'm now in an absolute dream job. I own a house and am married to the woman who stayed with me through that breakdown and all of pandemic. I cannot express how grateful I am to have made it here, and I feel truly blessed things worked out the way they did. Story 28. Put in my 2 weeks notice at a retail job that I had worked at 10 plus years. Applied to everything to try and get an office job and got picked up by a temp agency. I was placed really fast and I got hired permanently by them after my 3 months was up. And I'm still there. Highly recommend anyone checking out temp agencies if you are in a similar boat I was in. Long-term retail with no college, some college, but no degree. Story 29. A new manager had stepped in for my current boss who was leaving due to taking a better, higher paying position. I didn't really like her that much, but I didn't know that she had a real problem with me until she suddenly cut my hours from me working 35, 40 a week to only having like 7 hours on the next week's schedule. I felt so disrespected I didn't even put in a 2-week notice and ended up leaving about 3 or 4 days after the schedule change happened. I knew I could find another job for how much I was getting paid, $12 plus commission, but I didn't know it would take me longer than a month. I ended up applying, calling, going into places trying to get a job. After about a month and a half, I decided to settle on working 2 jobs, Subway and GNC. And it went pretty smoothly because they were both right next to each other, so I would open at Subway and close at GNC in the same day. It was very easy labor and nothing too stressful, so I was grateful at the time. Story 30. I left my first job out of college after 7 years of dealing with some toxic workplace BS without another job lined up. I was essentially working paycheck to paycheck, but was able to live on my savings for 3 months until I found the job I really wanted. I turned down 2 other jobs that felt like they were just accepting a job. I was lucky enough to be able to hold out until I got the offer I wanted. The first month before I got paid at the new job was really painful as I had burnt through all of my savings at that point. But I still look back on that time and really enjoyed it so much. I camped, I road tripped, spent time with my parents, and enjoyed the spring weather. I doubt I could swing this now, so I look back on this time and feel grateful. The job I accepted ended up being the one to springboard my professional career and set me up with great experiences and connections in the public sector, which I personally enjoyed tremendously, especially the bennies. Story 31. I'm kind of old school in that I like to give my 2 weeks. I know a lot of people hate that. Anyway, I had a few interviews, but nothing materialized because I wanted to give my 2 weeks and they wanted me in ASAP, TBH. The jobs probably wouldn't have worked out for me anyway. Since it wasn't working, I just quit. Had like 6 shifts left overall then. I did have money to keep me until Christmas at the time, before I'd have to start looking for real if I had to, and I'd just go get another cook job and try again the following summer. I messaged my friend, and he told me I should apply at his place. He suggested this to me back in 2010 when I got fired, but I was a line cook for the majority of my working life and had no idea if I could even do that job. Sure enough, I got hired and I finished at my old job on the Friday and then started the following Monday, coming up on my 3 years already in October. Story 32. The company I worked for almost a decade was bought by a global conglomerate in our industry, and at first I was optimistic that the good things we did would help us keep our jobs past the transition period most of us were given. I worked my butt off to add value for my team in the hopes it would lend itself to a permission position with the company. And guess what? It worked. They offered me an opportunity to stay in my position, but at the pay I had when I started the transition, 6 mo stay. Only problem is I had gotten a 5-month pay increase 2 months into the transition period, negotiated prior to the acquisition, and I would give up my severance agreement, 7.5 in retention bonus, and yearly bonus. So looking at a 5-month pay cut, loss of retention, severance, and yearly bonus. I said duck it and left. Chilled for 6 months until my old boss contacted me about a job, basically doing what I was doing before for more money. I lucked out immensely. Story 33. Not me, but my friend hated working for our organization and got an Australian working holiday visa with the idea to live there for at least a year and eventually find a sponsor for a permanent visa. Did the preparation in secret and sent in their resignation letter before boarding their flight. After a week, they realized it wasn't going to be the fun adventure they'd imagined. Working at a water park and living in cheap dorms for a year suddenly wasn't appealing, and came back to our city. Got a job with a different organization in our industry, but quit that after a while, too. Then pandemic hit and everyone stopped hiring for a while. They started a business afterwards completely unrelated to the industry they had experience and education in. I think they're happy with where they've ended up, but they seem to have just traded office job problems for small business owner problems, which I guess is preferable to some people. I guess the moral is, you can always transition from what you thought your passion would be. Story 34. I quit my McDonald's job just before the holidays in college because it was absolutely soul-crushing. The second I resolved to quit, it was like a huge weight had lifted off my shoulders. I told my friend immediately after, not really looking for solutions, but just kind of shooting the shot. She got me hired onto the coolest gig I've worked to date, basically just doing demos for the Nintendo Switch in a mall. I didn't even have to try to sell anything on the spot. Just let people play video games for free, give away free merch, and plant the seed into parents' heads that Switch games might be a fun Christmas present for their kids. The gig itself didn't last for very long, just a couple months, but it was a lot of fun and really easy to be enthusiastic about. I ended up doing a string of marketing event staff gigs after that, which took me places ranging from a Lynyrd Skynyrd concert to one of NASA's campuses. It was a very interesting time of my life. Story 35. Decided I hated sales and walked out halfway through the day. Knew I missed unique benefits from a previous job, so during a 3-day trip with my stepkids class, I thought about jobs that had unique benefits again, made a list. About 6 weeks later, I started my new job. A year later with the same company, and took a promotion where I make the most I've ever made in my whole life. I already have my direct bosses looking to help me take my next step with my company also. Best decision I ever made. I've done a lot of things impulsively. I think it's important to take time and burn off the stress of what made you snap. But after that first day or two, you've got to get your crap together and figure out what will make things better and how you're going to try to get there. The unique benefit is free flights. I just got back from a quick week trip to Italy. Story 36. Left a crap retail job right shortly after pandemic lockdowns ended, and we returned to work with no backup job. Ended up going about 9 months without work and was basically out of savings by the end. Spent some time getting a certification to bolster my useless computer science degree and managed to get a decent job in it. Despite burning the entirety of my savings, I don't regret it at all. I have a habit of getting complacent because of the anxiety of changing jobs from somewhere. I was already comfortable, even if the job was underpaid, overworked, and unappreciated. But I don't regret it for a second. I am still a bit overworked and underpaid, even at my new job, but I am appreciated. My quality of life is significantly better than the retail hell I was in before. However, I don't know if I could do it again. Getting down to nothing was also a pretty scary feeling too, and I was lucky that I got hired when I did. Story 37. I quit my job this past spring. Had been there 7 years and was just completely burnt out. Had 5 weeks off before I started a new job, and it was the best thing I've ever done for my mental health. Was able to take a few trips and just decompress. However, I did burn through my savings and am just finally recovering there. But I did land a better paying, lower stress job in my same field with wonderful management. I don't know that I'd recommend it to everyone, especially in the current job market, but I work in a more niche area and knew that even if it ended up being a pay cut, with my experience, I'd most likely be able to find something. But truthfully, it wasn't until I had quit that I had to get serious about finding a new job. I knew I wanted to leave for a while, but it was tough to find that motivation when I was burnt out every night. Story 38. Had a mental breakdown due to poor management stopping taking my meds. My employer was blaming me for my project being behind schedule. It was actually due to them over-promising and ordering it wrong. I quit with no notice and slept on my couch for 2 weeks, got back on meds, got a new job, but told them I wanted to start in 2 more weeks, then slept on my couch for another 2 weeks. I went through most of my savings in that month. Then I worked at the new place for about 6 months. It was fun, and I learned a lot. My old employer cleaned house up to the regional VP level and called me up offering a sizable raise and promotion. I've been back for almost a year and doing fine. Also, someone else took over my project when I left. It is still not done a year and a half later. They're still trying to untangle the mess old management made of it. Story 39. Quit a very toxic job 3 years ago around Thanksgiving with plans to find work after New Year's. January came and my daughter had surgery and basically needed someone to care for her daily for about 4 months after, so I did that. My wife made a huge upgrade with her job during that time, and I've been a stay-at-home dad ever since. Our youngest just started school this year, so I'm about to jump back into the hunt. Story 40. Several years ago, I decided one evening to quit my job and move to another country, and did so in under 24 hours. It is one of the best decisions I've ever made, and set the arc for the next 15 years of my life. My partner and I were separated shortly after we got married due to immigration issues, and after a few months, their mental health was not doing great. They were living with their parents. I moved in with them for the remaining 9 months of waiting. When we moved back together, I needed a job, and lucked into what turned into my dream job at the company I had wanted to work at since middle school. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge how incredibly lucky we were and express appreciation that the quality of life we've experienced since then is owed entirely to our family's willingness and ability to support us rent-free while we floated in legal limbo. Story 41. It was scary at first, but I no option, because the work there was getting toxic every day, and I couldn't take it. I was taking leaves continuously because of mental breakdowns happening every other day, but then it went peak, and where I decided, okay, that's enough for me, and I had to abruptly quit without a backup plan. Just quit. What next was to look for a job. But I was skilled enough and had good networks. I landed up into 3 freelance projects within the first month after quitting. They were all long-term projects and were going pretty well. I worked for a year, but then I was in a need to move to a different city, so started applying for jobs. And I did get multiple offers. Most of them were remote. Finally got a job in one of my favorite cities, and of course the job I wanted to work on. So don't quit, just keep upskilling. Story 42. I got incredibly lucky. I've told this story before, but essentially, I worked for a business owner that was also running for federal office, without ever holding a prior elected position, I might add. Some restrictions he placed on how I could do my job because of his campaign reflected poorly on my integrity. I got reamed one day for having the audacity to care about my professional reputation. So I talked it over with my wife, who was 3 months pregnant at this point. Despite it being a very stupid idea, she was supportive of me quitting. I put my notice in the next day with nothing lined up. Half an hour later, I got a call from a guy I knew who needed someone in my field, and it changed the direction of my career. It was honestly the best move I could have made, but I'm also quite cognizant that it could have easily got the other way. Story 43. I was still getting paid out for my vacation time, and bonus pay from the month I left was sent the month after. I was good for about 3 months. Unemployed for 6 months total before I decided to seriously start looking. It gave me a different perspective on what I wanted and who I wanted to be as a person. Also taught me to respect myself, and if the same thing ever happened again, I'd definitely leave again. I was head of a department, and the head of a different department got red in the face, angry at me. I needed to work with this person for the foreseeable future. So once that happened, I knew there was nothing that could repair it. And honestly, the idea that it could happen at all told me it wouldn't be the first time or the last time. Also helped that I felt a lot of the company values contradicted my morals. Story 44. Left a 6-figure job with no notice or plan. Spent the next 2 years trying to replace that job, and then the pandemic hit. Been hustling side gigs ever since, and thankful I was able to spend so much time with my kids. Still didn't get hired to an equivalent income tiered job, but I've made the best of my crap situation, and now I value time more than money. I'm thankful that I had a hobby which I was an expert in, which I was able to convert to a robust side gig that at least covered bills. Story 45. In the past, the last time I was jobless for only a week, finding something new was pretty easy regardless, as long as you could prove your desirability and drive to someone who could see it and match it with your resume. That's no longer how it works. People, especially managers, are ducking stupid across the board. So many of them have jobs they never earned. I lost mine recently, involuntarily, due to the company being purchased just to be closed up and dissolved. I don't have a backup plan in the sense that my career doesn't have any other jobs where I live at all. And due to the house market, I am pretty home-trapped where I'm at. It's been months, and unemployment is running low. I'll likely have to shift gears, start fresh, and sacrifice over 10 Hoichur. In today's world, that's all the harm you need to remove you from being comfortable, as I previously was. Story 46. During pandemic, my partner and I were completely fed up with our work and housing situation. We both quit at the end of our lease and moved across the country with no plan, just a destination. We rented an Airbnb for the first week and immediately started looking for work and housing. By the end of that week, we had landed a 1-bedroom apartment that worked for us. We both took any job we could find. She landed a job at the local aquarium, and I started working in the kitchen of a pizzeria/brewery. On top of that, we got side jobs. She led kayak tours, and I worked for a local farmer. We did this for about 18 months. Then she got her dream job back in our home state and moved back. It took me about 6 more months, but ultimately landed a career-worthy job about 3-4 hours drive away from her. Story 47. I had a back surgery end of May 2020 Then through the next couple months, I was lazing around thinking what I wanted to do. Unexpectedly, the opportunity came for a job interview halfway across the country to see about becoming a residential real estate appraiser through an apprenticeship if things went well, when my grandma was selling her house, who had retired out there years before. I flew out to visit for a week. I had my interview that went well, and I flew home and did some online classes to be an apprentice appraiser, and moved out there and started my apprenticeship Jan 21. I went through my apprenticeship and stayed on with the same family that trained me as a certified appraiser for a few years until it became too much to be away from the majority of my family. But that's another story, and part of my recent past, my present and future. Story 48. I was working 2 jobs, needed both to make ends meet. Quit one because I got stuck between the union and the management both being banana wads. The other immediately slowed down to the point where no one was getting more than 4 hours. Finally, got scheduled for an 8-hour shift, walked in, boss told me to go home because he was taking my shift in order to get his own hours. Pissed off at this, I told my parents, and they luckily bailed me out by giving me some money for 2 months while I looked for another job. Eventually found myself at Walmart, and my parents told me they'd never do that again, with the boss of the second job going completely surprised Pikachu that I quit out of the blue. That boss then asked me if I could cover a shift 2 weeks after I left without pay. Didn't even text him back. Story 49. It's not something I'd recommend unless you really have to quit or have a partner with a stable income, or you have savings. I left my job a month ago with nothing lined up. It was absolutely necessary after I tried everything. I tried having one-on-one meetings with my toxic boss to try to find a middle ground. I tried getting HR involved, mistake. Burned through my PTO for mental health days, etc. But I finally reached a breaking point and quit. I've been enjoying the summer. I've been going to sporting events, concerts, farmers markets, and spending time with my dogs. I have been looking and have several interviews lined up. I do have a partner who has a salary that is double what I was making, and we have savings, so that is helping a lot while I take time to find the right job, one where I won't need or want to quit. Story 50. The first time I did this, I knew that a competitor had interest in me thanks to a former coworker greasing the wheels. I took a few days to chill and then walked into an interview where they created a position for me because they didn't have any job openings at the time. That was 17 years ago. The second time I did this, I spent 6 months doing freelance work while looking for something bigger. It caused tension in my relationship, and I became single and crashing in my mother's spare bedroom for the last month of that stretch before getting hired in a full-time gig. That was 11 years ago. Nowadays, I think I'd end up jobless and homeless. Story 51. Was working as a video store manager about 15 years ago. Ducking sucked, often spent most of my days alone, putting away movies, doing inventory, dealing with a-holes on the phone who didn't want to pay late fees, etc. Told my district manager that I wanted to take my birthday off, which happened to fall on a day when managers were meant to do a bunch of BS work. She said no way, and that I'd be lucky to get a day off that week. Without even giving it a second thought, I dropped my store key on the counter and said, "Okay, then I quit. Hope you get it figured out." Drove home, told my wife. She understandably freaked out. I said, "I've been talking about joining the Air Force for years. I'm going to do it." Next day, I drove to a recruiter, second best decision of my life, joining the Air Force. Story 52. The rest of my coworkers quit a week later, leaving the crafty managers scrambling for help. Then my house burned down, and then pandemic hit, and I struggled to find new work. I was taking online college courses at the time and managed to at least complete my degree program. I found a full-time job and a part-time job, not in my field of study and minimum wage, but I managed to save up enough to lease a car and then started applying to a bunch of jobs in my field. Finally found one that I'm still with and extremely happy there. Nonprofit, so not the best pay, also not the worst pay, but great work environment. Still working a part-time side job to try and make ends meet and still trying to dig out of the hole after the fire, but I'm taking tiny steps in the right direction. Story 53. Lost the ability to sleep during the day, had to leave in early October. Family business kept me fairly busy through October and most of November. Actually enjoyed Thanksgiving with my family without worrying about going to work later that day or the next day and being fully awake at the time. Got a courier job for a subcontractor who called back within 30 seconds at 10 till midnight on a Saturday. Lasted 3 weeks, 2 of which were training. Nice job, terrible company. Not a total loss, got much better at defensive driving, and am comfortable backing up with only wing mirrors. Enjoyed Christmas and New Year's with family. Got a job at a hardware store in late January, but then they went in overassigned hours and put me on standby for another 3 weeks. Employment has been reasonably solid ever since. Story 54. This was July of last year for me. I had a very toxic manager and poor team culture. It was nerve-wracking, but I quit and began looking for jobs immediately. I signed an offer in September and started my new role in November. The month of October felt like a true break, and I was really refreshed after. I interviewed with roughly 12 companies and got a ton of declines. Job hunting is terrible and wore on my self-esteem with every rejection I got. I also had to do a lot more prep than ever before. Multiple panels requested a presentation or a take-home. But ultimately, I'm much happier with where I landed. The job market landscape, ESP, for my job family is worse now, though. I don't know that I would take that same chance today. Tub 8. Story 55. I gambled with my job. I thought they wouldn't let me leave and would let me WFH because I saved their asses so many times. I gave my everything to the company, and I was the backbone of my department. I then went on maternity leave, came back for a few weeks, and tried to negotiate my position to be from home. It didn't work. I was not as special as I thought I was. I was just a number like any other. I couldn't make it back to the office. I lived too far away and I had no daycare. So I had to quit. It was very humbling. Miso had to figure out how to support our family on his salary very quickly as he wanted me to become a SOM instead. The first year was extremely rough, but we made it work. Story 56. I was a roving camp cook. Summers were children's camp and winters were work camps. There are not a lot of people who specialize in this work. And in my day, I was an all-star. I have walked off work sites several times, mostly because owners did not deliver on the terms of the contract or middle managers treated me like a minimum wage kitchen monkey. I knew that I was in high demand and would have no trouble picking up a gig at any time. So when the vegetarian liaison got Karenni with me because I had 300 kids to feed and did not have time to cater to her 12 girls the same way, I would take off my apron and walk away while throwing said apron over my shoulder. I got into this business because I don't take direction well. Story 57. Decided to quit when I got stuck on a bush track with a flat tire and a pump that wouldn't work on a 42C day. Walked out and decided I was done. I just didn't want to go back. All those long hours and fixing half-baked code I was sent to deliver. Turns out clients see who's getting crap done. Started getting offers as soon as I said I was done. Did part-time for the 6-month non-compete. Also got some advice that there was zero chance of any ruling against me. 15 years later, I make a lot more. Mostly better hours, but I get paid well for every hour, and clients who want stuff done without any of the old office politics. I actually enjoy my job. Coding and designing solutions is a nice little logic puzzle. Story 58. Over a 25-year career, I never thought I'd ever quit without another job. But the workplace and leadership changed around me, became very toxic, and I found myself working for someone I had no respect for and who angered me so bad. I worried I'd lose my temper at work. I would not spend the hours of my life working so she could get her bonus. This was not just my issue. Nearly everyone in our group quit. I lied and said I was leaving to work for my husband's business, just so I didn't look reckless. While looking for a new role, the reckoning with what that work environment did hit hard. I had a difficult time selling myself. Eventually, working for my husband's business turned out to be the path forward, and that's what I do now. Story 59. Left my job as a claims adjuster 3 months ago. Huge anxiety issues. Reapplied this week because I need money. Plan is to hopefully get another adjuster job, ride out my current lease, reduce my spending and bills significantly, move in with brother and pay less monthly. Trying to start a photography business, but even with a portfolio, people can't pay. I've tried offering solutions, and most just want to use their iPhone and be done with it. End game is to get mental health in order, survive until next lease, then get a less stressful job that may pay less, but doesn't kill me. Maybe find a wife I can split bills with. And although somewhat truthful, it sucks that I'd be dating with financial stability in mind. It feels wrong, but it is the right thing to do. Story 60. Put in my notice, got to about a week left and hadn't found a new one. Company knew that they had driven me away, asked if I could unquit. They said no, as they had filled the role, but offered for me to stay on for 2 months to train my replacement. Took that, got a job offer elsewhere. Did all the interviews, accepted the position, had a month left for training the replacement, told them my start date for the new job, which was in 2 weeks' time. They put me on immediate garden leave, company pays out of pocket for me to sit at home unless they need me, and wished me well. Have moved on from that company as they were even more toxic, but I'm doing well at the company I'm at now. Story 61. I was hoping to take a good 5 to 6 months before looking with the goal of finding work in a new industry. I was extremely burnt out and had a really big savings pillow, so I was pretty stress-free about the whole thing. Unfortunately, I had ordered a car almost 2 years prior and hadn't heard anything from them. I assumed it was in limbo and that I wouldn't hear about it for another year or so, which was fine. The car I had was great and reliable still. Got an email from the dealership a week after I gave my notice that it'd be arriving in 2 months. So I enjoyed those 2 months and found a job through a former co-work union mate. Same industry, but my schedule is pretty tits and I make enough. Story 62. I spent the holidays in a new city, waking up when I wanted to, playing video games and finding new dinner recipes. Tried baking. Then after 2 months, I decided I was ready to work again and started applying for jobs on LinkedIn. Spent 6 months with hundreds of applications, interviews, rejections, sleepless nights, endless worry, low self-esteem, and desperation. I got one job offer. One. I accepted it, and it turned out I'm on a small team of people I like and do great work that I'm easily appreciated for. Wish I made more money, but I get small raises every year. I'm settling in a good spot. No more corporate ladder climbing, just sitting comfy. If I didn't have that offer, though, it would be a different story right now. Story 63. About 3 years ago, my boss left for another job, and they hired someone in his place who was a nightmare to work with. I gave the new guy a few months, and it was clear that things were only getting worse and not better, so I set a drop-dead date to leave if I hadn't found a job by then. After I left, it took a couple months, but got an offer with a significant raise and increased responsibilities, and it really worked out. Probably wouldn't do it in this economic climate if I could avoid it. You do what you have to do to survive. But I had the emergency fund saved, and not going nuts at work every day is kind of important for mental health, so it was worth it. Story 64. Had an amazing job, was paid well, respected, worked hard, loved it. Company bought by a financier who brought in his own management. Dude was corrupt AF, made impossible demands, and caused such a massive exodus of talent that they had to pay people to stay until replacements could be found. I finally said no more. I had been distributing resumes and interviewing for a month before I quit with no backup plan. 1 hour after I quit, one job made an offer I accepted, and now it's history. I make a lot less money, but I still think in the big picture that I traded up for a good job away from the crap storm that was my previous manager. When all was said and done, I was unemployed for 1 hour. Story 65. In 2017, I went on what I called the Couch Surfing World Tour and crashed with friends in Manila, Hawaii, Seattle, and San Francisco. Along the way, I reached out to people who were in companies and roles I admired and would meet up for coffee or lunch to get advice and share my story. Ended up stopping the tour halfway to dive deep in San Francisco because lots of people were down to connect, and in person they were supportive of who I was and my chances. It took a year of grinding and lots of highs and lows, but in 2018 I ended up with a full-time position at Twitch. I was there until the end of 2023, where I got reorged into Amazon and am still currently at Story 66, 20 years ago. It was my first job out of college. I got fed up with my supervisor taking credit for my work and blaming me for her mistakes. I quit on the spot after being blamed for something everyone there knew was her responsibility. My cocky ass thought that since I had an IT degree, I would find another job immediately. Weeks later, no luck. I worked construction with a former buddy to make ends meet. It took a year to get back into a computer job at half of the salary that I made from the job I quit. Fast forward to now. Worked my way up the ladder, and I am currently the Chief Information Officer of my company. That would never have happened at my first job. Story 67, finally left my job last month, had been there 10 years, but I didn't feel like a person anymore, just a machine. Was struggling to get up in the morning, and it was the most mentally unwell I've ever been. Since I quit, it's been the most gorgeous summer in years, so I've been to the beach almost every day to read or write and swim. My friends and family say I seem more alive and happy, hoping to start therapy soon too. I'm enjoying doing nothing, but I'm already worried about money. I don't go get fancy coffees anymore. I have a savings, but I'd like to not dip into too much. So I'm probably going to monetize my hobbies until I'm ready to jump back into a real job. Story 68. I was a waitress and working about 70 hours a week. Quitting was the best thing that ever happened to me. I took school and studying for interviews seriously because now I had time, and got a software job. After about 12 years, the software industry is now sadly worse than waitressing. I'm leaving, once again with nothing lined up. But last time it was the best decision of my life, so I'm actually really excited to see what happens next. In the first case, I had an okay amount saved up. Now, I'm fine. I think there's a time between 25 and 45 when walking off the job or quitting starts to get a bit more serious. When I was a waitress, I could go on my parents' insurance. Story 69. 2021, quit my full-time buyer-manager position of 4 hours, with essentially nothing lined up, in a field I went to college for. Got a part-time job at a coffee shop and did a Google course in analytics. 8 months later, got a job, now been a data analyst for 3 years at a local marketing agency. Only recently started making the same as I did before, but I enjoy my work, my boss, and coworkers, and have better mental, physical health. I will say job hunting was pretty brutal. Sending resumes out to the void, getting ghosted for interviews, even had an offer rescinded after 4 rounds. Having the PT gig really kept me afloat and not sulk in front of a screen all day. Story 70. I started making thousands of dollars a month selling silly little designs on shirts, stickers, and more. It was dropshipping, and I wasn't making what I could have if I was making the shirts and stickers myself. And then I learned that promotion and marketing is key, and I really sucked at it. So I went from thousands a month to hundreds to now I'm happy if I'm getting $20 per month. So that was a fun year and a half, but now I'm broke and need work and have to explain a nearly 2-year gap because my online store success didn't come until a few months after I left. I just couldn't do medical insurance anymore. And on that note, Please hire me somewhere. I'm losing my mind. Story 71. I quit a call center job and came back from a vacation just like, I don't want to be here anymore, and requested every bit of PTO. I could the next 2 weeks, like 8 days off, and ended that shift, wrote my 2 weeks notice to my team lead. So I just came back for like 2 shifts and spent most of them cleaning my desk. I coasted on savings for a few weeks, then did a temp door-to-door sales. Quit that and gave a hiring firm my info, and they landed me an NOC position with an energy company. And I've been there 7 years and recently moved to a supervisor role. It was an exhilarating feeling in weeks, just not knowing the story 72. About 4 to 5-ish years now, everyone was calming down from the pandemic. I was only a couple of months in working for a new company, still burnt out. I decided to quit one day without a plan. With practically no money saved up and bills coming up, I was forced to sell a lot of my crap at dirt cheap rates. Sold my i7 4070K, 7990 AMD, 64 RAM PC for less than $200. Sold a bunch of kitchen appliances and sports jerseys for less than $50 each. It was miserable. I hated my decision. Everything I worked so hard for to be sold for so much less in desperation. Nearly went homeless, but thankfully my parents helped me out. I still haven't recovered. Story 73. I have done this successfully twice. It worked for me, but it's not for everyone. I think there's 3 reasons why I had success. 1, I've always been very competent at work. Usually when I was leaving roles because the inertia of promotion timing and salary progression was working against me. 2, both times I moved from a smaller market to a larger market. 3, I have a strong support structure of friends in multiple metro areas. The type of friends that would be fine for you to crash on their couches for multiple months if need be. I think the things that drive you to making such a bold move are usually pretty negative. So I hope you're doing all right, Oppi. Story 74. It was the best feeling giving my then boss my 2 weeks. And I hadn't even interviewed for any other jobs or barely sent any resumes out. One of the big companies we worked heavily with learned I was leaving and created a job position for me. Called me telling me to apply and was with them a month later. Story 75. I quit my job due to the fact I was doing several people's jobs. Told them to hire more people, was told no, ended up in the hospital due to anxiety and stress. Was one of the only person who knew the side of the business I was on, the most profitable. They offered me a 12% raise. I said no. They then offered me a large lump sum to train 3 people to take over my duties over 2 to 3 weeks. I took it, and 2 years later, still haven't been able to find a job in my industry. But I no longer feel like I'm going to have a heart attack when I hear or see an email notification. Story 76. I got laid off from Big Lots in March and entered the Florida unemployment program in April. I got hired at a car dealership in June, moving service vehicles. The entire time I worked there, I had stomach cramps, chest tension, and for some reason I woke up at 3:30 a.m. every day inexplicably. After 3 weeks, I turned in my crap with a note that basically said, "Don't come look for me." The day after I quit, I got an interview notice for a temp position at my local library. It doesn't pay as well, and it ain't perfect, but it beats the crap out of getting blamed for everything and listening to employed adults throw a ducking tantrum all day. Story 77. I took some time to reflect on my life balance, traveled a little bit on the cheap, applied to a ton of roles with basically no response, took up some gig work to take the sting out of living off saving. While that was all going on, I allowed myself to pursue songwriting with the extra time. I got myself not only performing in front of people at open mics, but now I gig 3-hour sets all over the damn place, regularly get invited back and get paid to do it. It doesn't cover all the bills, of course, but as luck would have it, I was able to find some part-time consulting work that does. Story 78. After 9 months of panic attacks and abject misery, I quit my auditing job on the spot, drove my laptop back to the office, emailed my supervisor saying, "Never contact me again," and walked out the door. And it was right before my vacation and my birthday, so I decided I wouldn't worry about a thing on that trip. Took a couple hours and applied for jobs every morning and had a quality offer 2 weeks later. It was at the peak of the Great Resignation, and that helped, but I've never had a problem getting hired either, so it was a risk that paid off. Also, it was such a fun trip and one of my favorite birthdays ever. Story 79 was working night shift doing data entry at a fish warehouse 20-some years ago. Had a bad headache, which a couple years later I found out was due to a brain tumor, and a bad night. Coworker office lady was snipping at me all night, and I got pissed, yelled at her, yelled at the night shift supervisor, and walked off the job. I had a bit of savings, and I didn't even start looking for another job for almost a month, but I found a retail job right away when I started looking. Honestly, I probably should have just taken some deep breaths and some Tylenol and handled it because that retail job sucked bad. Story 80. I was unemployed for 6 months after I quit my crafty call center job during the pandemic. My mom had just died and my car had been totaled, and I was in a new city where I knew no one, and I just couldn't handle all of that and a crafty job in top of it. I ended up getting a part-time job working for a talent agent. I then used that to get a full-time job with an entertainment company, and I've been there ever since. I hated that call center job, and I'm glad I quit, but those 6 months with no job were hard because I didn't qualify for unemployment. Story 81. I quit my FT job for one I thought would be a great job. I was wrong in many ways. I had savings as well as a 16-hour weekend job, so it wasn't completely without a fallback. But it got nerve-wracking watching my account trickle down, and those 16-hour checks weren't enough. I ended up applying for and getting hired at a federal contractor 3 months later, which was a good gig, but we got pandemic layoffs, and I've been at my current job for 5 years now. That's just one of like 3 or 4 times it's happened, though. It seems things always work themselves out somehow. Story 82. I had the best experience with this. I left a position that paid 6 figures mutually on Feb 2020 of 220. I was given a 3-month severance because of my performance. This Sue was a psychopath and I just couldn't stomach it. 2 weeks later, the world shut down for pandemic. He honored the severance. I spent 3 months playing with my kids while the world melted down making great money. 2 weeks after my severance ended, I landed another great job that I keep for 2 years before starting my own business. It was truly a unique experience that I can't imagine anyone else going through, but you asked. So, story 83, I took on a supervisor job, about 45 people, soon after graduating and was so out of my comfort zone. I turned in my resignation letter without any plan whatsoever. A guy that I had worked for in college heard about it, gave me a call and a job offer that was more suited to me. It ultimately led to a couple of promotions and job that lasted for 20 years. Story 84. Worked as a cook in a semi-fine dining job for 3 years. By the end, I could work all the stations in the kitchen as well as the sushi bar out front, which was the only tipped cook position. Chef never let me work sushi bar because I was always needed somewhere else to train or fill in for somebody who was out. It cost me $5 an hour in tips. Put in my 2 weeks and one of the servers told me their other job needed a lead sushi chef that same night. Didn't even get a long weekend between jobs and ended up nearly doubling my pay. Story 85. I quit my janitorial floor tech job with no backup plan. My wife said it was the best month of her life. The house had never been cleaner and cooked so many of her more time-consuming and involved dinners. I was a chef in another life. Got a rent-a-cop license and worked that till I got a help desk job and then a contract network tech job and now I work as a network admin. Education and certs along the way. Babysitting parking lots leaves a bunch of time to study. Story 86. Left a job I hated without something lined up and regretted it shortly after. All I got for it was me desperate, then taking something worse. Because I needed a paycheck and a bunch of credit card debt to cover bills, I am still paying off. Also recently had someone I know deliberately get fired from a job they hated so they could get 1 month severance, and then they got evicted from their home when the money ran out before they got a new job. I will never quit a job just because I don't like it ever again without having a new one lined up. Story 87. Mine was also a while ago, about 8 years ago. I took a couple months off after being burned out, moved and took a temp job immediately, and then got hired at a different job where I moved on after a year. Been doing what I do now for 6-ish years, fully remote, and have moved 2 times since. I enjoy moving around and plan to do it again this spring. And currently living in El Coal area has allowed me to be risk adverse and save enough to never be beholden to another crafty company. I can walk away again if I have to. Story 88. I had about $11,000 in savings with minimal expenses, and I took like a month off, and I just started doing DoorDash and Instacart, and I make more than I made when I had a real job going in at 2 a.m., unloading 18 pallet trucks of produce as a manager in the freezing cold, and having to work the whole truck, then having to juice, cut fruit and vegetables, and hand make guacamole, all while getting pulled into the office because I'm not doing good enough. Story 89. Continued fixing my mental health. Took some time to remember I'm a human and not a number. Cashed out my 401k so I wasn't destitute or a burden to my better half. Worked on my resume and interviewing and got disheartened by the changing scope of the job market. It took 9 months but found a job as a contractor at a utility co, hoping it becomes a full-time gig with the company versus extending my contract. But I just crossed the 2-month mark and all seems good so far. Trying to soak up what I can and make myself useful. Story 90. I took about a week of doing absolutely nothing and then started learning Python and SQL to try and upskill since my previous job hadn't let me use my degree at all. I then pretty much made applying for jobs my new full-time job and ended up getting a volunteer position using my degree that gave me some much-needed experience to get a full-time one at another place. I think all in all, it was about 6 months as without any income, which was rough. But my old job was absolutely soul-sucking, and I just could not continue being there. Story 91. I've done it twice. It worked out better both times. The first time it took me about a month to find the next gig. The second one took all of 4 hours. The key is to make friends in your industry who know you and your work well. If you're good, finding another job isn't hard at all. Your first friend may not have an opening, but it won't take long to find someone who does. If you're relying on randomly applying to HR departments that advertise openings, then yes, you will likely have a very difficult time. Story 92. I left a postdoc position so I could be with my now wife. I started applying to jobs before I left and had a few interviews. I moved and those opportunities fell through, and then 2020 happened. The region I was in was not conducive to my industry, and finding opportunities were barely there. Ended up working retail for 2 years before I got a job as a college professor. Probably the most frustrating part was living near a major university and applying for tens of lab and research positions, and I got interviewed for only 2 of them. Story 93. I quit a job at the beginning of last summer and ended up having half a summer vacation. I had been applying for about 8 months prior to leaving, but hadn't secured anything yet. I had interviews during my first week after leaving the job, and for most of the next 5 or 6 weeks, it was basically just progressing towards an offer with one of the companies I interviewed for that week. That job ended up being pretty scummy though, as they would hire people on full-time but let them go before their probation ended. Story 94. I wasn't getting replies from any job applications in the state I was applying in while having an out-of-state address. So I quit my current job, packed up, and moved across country. Had a year's worth of savings to live off of, landed an apartment, applied like crazy, got a job. Now I make more than I ever have before. Was a solid win for me. Scary F, though, was racing pandemic lockdowns across the country in the early stages of the pandemic. Every state had a different response and made traveling difficult. Story 95. I gave my job a 2-day notice before I traveled out of the country for the first time ever because they informed me a few days before that they weren't going to approve my vacation that I had submitted months prior. I basically just said, screw them, I'm going regardless. Got lucky as crap, and the job I applied to offered a position like 36 hours later on my last day at that job, right before the trip. Trip was awesome, by the way, and I started my new job upon returning. Story 96. I got another job I had applied for 2 weeks later. What made me quit was the fact that I had worked 6 a.m. to midnight for 18 days in a row. Day 19, I was off. The phone went off early that morning. I answered, and my Don yelled at me, called me names and other stuff. They were apparently short-staffed again. I was just exhausted and wouldn't come in. I, in fact, refused to ever come back again and made it known in no uncertain terms that I quit. Effective immediately. Story 97. I took 9 months off. I did some social media work for a few friends with their business for just enough to pay the bills. Zero extra. I saved money not going out, and I just decompressed from 3 hell jobs back to back over 6 years. Then a former coworker told me someone was leaving his place, and I applied. Then that guy decided he wasn't leaving, but I did well enough on my interview. They wanted me anyways. I had to wait 3 extra months, but it's been worth it. Story 98. I procrastinated for years because I had a mortgage. The owner was a bully with an anger management problem. He had this massive flare-up and told me to go home and write a response for tomorrow saying how I would improve. I wrote, I quit, then called in sick and took stress leave for the entire notice period. He was going on holiday the next week and had no one to run the shop, so had to close. I had a job 3 days later. I should have done it earlier. Story 99. I got an offer 2 weeks later and then enjoyed not working for 4 weeks. Worked with my pay schedule and I didn't miss a pay period. Honestly, I wouldn't do it again. It's so risky. But I was in the most toxic work environment I've ever been in and was completely over it when my boss yelled at me. I absolutely mentally couldn't take that job anymore. And I think the fact that I got a job so quickly was the universe saying the job there just wasn't for me. Story 100. Took out a small personal loan to pay bills, was still living with my parents at the time, took 8 months off and helped my dad replace the roof on his house, got a call for a job about a month before I was going to run out of money, and been there ever since in some fashion. Have since moved to another state and married my long-term girlfriend. Previous company I left closed up shop about a year later anyways. Leaving was one of the best decisions I ever made. Story 101. I screwed around for 6 months, enjoying my time off during my own personal summer of George. Then I started returning calls for people that had heard I left my prior job and started working again with one of them on a contract basis. I had that privilege because I had my previous job for 10 years and was well regarded in my field and didn't burn bridges when I left. Story 102. About 6 months of painful unemployment, followed by 3 months of a not ideal job, followed by an ideal job. I would say having a plan is worth it, but if you really need to leave a job, go ahead and leave. If you have savings and a support network, that's a plus. It was rough to just up and leave my job and struggle to find anything for a while. It makes you feel awful, but it's not something I would rule out completely if you need to leave. Story 103. I was basically laughed out of the room when I asked for either A, a raise, consistent with inflation, or B, make as much as the new guy they were having me train. I left immediately. I had only been sober for about 3 months at that point and was terrified but knew I deserved better. Was out of work for about a month before getting hired on at my current company. Been sober just over 8 months now and gave myself a 30% raise by leaving that hellhole Story 104. Called my father-in-law back when me and my ex were still married. I asked him if I could come work for him. I worked with him for about 8 months, and it was some of the best work experience I got. He had a tile installation company, and I was his helper. Didn't make great money, but riding around with him and having great conversations was exactly what I needed. We're still good friends to this day, even though my ex and I have been split for years. Story 105. Wow, a lot of W's in this thread. I was planning on doing a CDL, but one of the companies said I could get it paid for by the government if I applied for such and such since I was unemployed. Ended up bouncing around government offices for like 6 weeks of endless paperwork without getting an answer, before finally getting a no. By that point, my savings were drying up and my lease was almost out. Ended up then being hella unemployed and in dire straits for 6 months. Story 106. I floundered for about 6 months. Found a crap job that I worked for a year and a half, slowly losing money. Then I found a decent job and I'm rebuilding. As to why I quit, I was broken. I was going through a divorce, had to sell the house but still pay the mortgage until it sold, moved into my friend's place, and had a one-room office/bedroom living room. And I worked from home. It was like a prison. It did so much damage to my mental health. Story 107. It was very exciting at first. I'd been there 9 years and hated it most of the time. I had enough to get me by the first few months and almost nothing was off the table. Possibly selling my house, moving to another state, starting a whole new career, etc. In the midst of figuring it out, my mother got brain cancer. I put my whims aside and took the first job I could get so that I could stay close to her through it. Story 108. I've done it twice, both times. I had a very large emergency fund and also was living extremely cheap for my income at the time. I took a couple months off each time. It was great the second time I did a cross-country road trip just to explore. I'll never be able to do it again, so I'm grateful I did it. Both jobs were stressful for me, and I worked a lot of hours. Thankful to get out of them types of jobs. Story 109. Unemployed for a year, fighting burnout, depression, and trying to find a new job through both it and family issues. Got seriously depressed. Started thinking darker thoughts as more and more rejections came in. Picked one last place for one last chance. And it's been a year since I was hired. I'm doing better now. Story 110. Too early for me. I quit 2 days ago with 0 notice, and I'm not planning to look for work until my siblings' chemo is done. But I've had 3 different managers reach out to me saying they wanted to work through my issues and keep me on. Funny how no one asked for my opinion until after I quit. I never even got a chance to express my opinion, since they told the relevant managers to not tell me I was moving. Story 111. Well, I looked for work for about 3 months, only to find temp work. Hourly came out to the same, minus health insurance. Did that for about 6 months and found a role that paid even more. Then, while at the new job, 3 months in, I got contacted by a different company that paid even more. Salary, 20K more. Jumped ship immediately. Was there for 1.5 years, and then the Duckers laid me off. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Story 112. Just spent the last 6 months renovating my house and now in the process of locking down an offer for a job I wanted rather than a job I needed. Burning out sucked. So rather than going into a spiral, I did a calculation of my savings, pulled the pin, and gave myself 6 months to do something I wanted rather than something that I needed. Universe rewarded me with an unexpected opportunity to re-enter the workforce on my terms, so here we are. Story 113, 25 years ago. I quit because I was fed up with the company, how they treated their customers, how they treated me, and the absolutely ridiculously low salary cap and teeny tiny pennies hour raises. Had no backup plan. Got an entry-level job in a factory a few weeks later. I still work there, but now as a senior manufacturing engineer, making 850% more than the salary cap at my old job. Oh, and the old company went out of business 10 years ago. Story 114. I threw away basically everything I owned, except my laptop, a bag of clothes, and 12 boxes of books that I put in storage. I moved across the country to sleep on a friend's floor in a city where I knew no one. I lived off my savings while looking for work in a completely different field. Took me about 10 months, and all of my savings, I found work. 12 years later, I still live in that city and work in that field. Story 115. I was going to quit in 3 months, but was handed a redundancy even better. My only plan was to take a year off to travel, having saved and invested plenty by living well below my means. Stumbled into a contracting gig with a tiny startup that was okay with my working the hours of my choosing, which has persisted 8 years. Less income, but enough and way more free time. Could I do that now in the age of AI? Maybe not. Story 116. Planned to not bother looking for 6 months, which is what I did. Studied for GMAT every morning, exercised, then smoked and gamed every day to complete a huge backlog during pandemic. Found a job with a couple months of looking after not getting into an Ivy League, Jade MBA program. Things have been much more calm and great decision overall. Story 117. I hitchhiked on my brother's semi to a town 6 hours away, applied for a bunch of jobs, but pandemic hit. So I was stuck with the only job offer available, and it turned out to be one of the best jobs and learning opportunities I've ever had. I ate canned food and bologna sandwiches for the first 2 months and couch surfed, but I'd do it all over again because I wouldn't be where I am now. Story 118, 2008. Quit my career job after 10 years, immediately before a recession was starting. I couldn't get another job. I couldn't get an interview. Went through all my money, sold a bunch of things I now wish I still had, went through all my retirement money, sold my motorcycle and truck, lost my home to foreclosure, which destroyed my credit for 7 years. Eventually got a job 1,500 miles away, had to move the family halfway across the country. Story 119. After college, I lost a job and got one a few weeks later at a car dealership. They wouldn't tell me how to decipher the numeric puzzle on the window that told the price. The other salesman repeatedly threw my stuff in the ditch behind the office. Twice. I quit and went to run errands with my girlfriend that evening. I saw a sign up at a computer repair shop. 2 weeks later, I was there working. Story 120. I haven't done that in almost 20 years. Having a family really puts a stop to irresponsible actions like that. But the last time I did just quit with no plan, I was working again in a week. Thankfully, I have a high-demand skilled trade, welding. I picked up attending a 2-year vocational school while in high school, and that has always enabled me to find at least a decent paying or altogether better job quickly. Story 121. I was going to take a break for a couple of months before job hunting again. After a couple of weeks, I got itchy and just wanted to do stuff. I started to apply to many places to practice interviews, but my very first one, I got hired. But I did still take my 2 months break. I just told them that. For context, I was with the former company for 17 years. I'm in it industry. Story 122. I had about 24 hours of thinking, oh, that might have been a bit daft, but I'm sure it'll be okay. Then the calls began and I got a message off someone I'd worked with previously. And within a week, I'd fully secured a new role. I will say it was helped by knowing the right people at the right time, and also having just passed my exams and become chartered in my field. Story 123. Quit my teaching job in Korea to fly to Guam to get a job there. No job in Guam. Flew back to CA and drove over the Ortega Eohui for a lark. Saw a hang glider. I didn't know they existed. Went to the hang glider shop and signed up for lessons and flew full-time for the next 5 years. Substitute teaching and living amazingly cheap. Our group was like that. Air addict, we called ourselves. Story 124. I was unemployed for 9 months. I work in an industry that's relatively small and getting smaller, so there's a lot of competition for what's available. I did receive a job offer after a few months, but I had to wait more than 6 months for the position to become available, which was a bit stressful. Not as stressful as my previous job, and I'm glad I quit. It was a toxic environment. Story 125. Quit a 6-figure, toxic corporate marketing role with a minimal backup plan. I had one client for 15 hours a week, so I had some income when I left, but I was so burnt out. 3 kids too, just grinding every day with deadlines and meetings. That was almost 3 years ago, and thankfully, I've been able to pick up more clients. My advice, just do it. You have one life. Everything is figure-out-able. Story 126. I once walked out of a kitchen on a busy Friday night because I was absolutely over the chef's abusive bullcrap, was constantly yelling and used to throw crap at people. Walked across the street to the other restaurant, asked if they were hiring. 20 miles later, I was working on their line restaurant jobs. Are so easy to come by. If you know what you're doing, no reason staying at a crafty place. Story 127. Left teaching after 10 years with no plan. Hooked up with a coaching buddy who had his own landscape company. Worked 3 years from him before becoming an SME for an edtech company. Now I work remote with flexible hours and make as much as I did teaching and no parents to deal with. Loved landscaping and might have stayed landscaping if moving to edtech wasn't a better move for my family. Story 128. I was completely burnt out at an old job back in early 2022. I knew that market was hot for people with my skill set, so I quit my job and planned a 3-month break. I had funds saved up from selling my house. 4 months later, I had my choice of 3 offers and landed a salary that was paying 25% more than my previous job. It was a great time. Story 129. In it right now. Left a horribly abusive workplace, and I'm so glad I did. Angle. There's fear, since I had nothing lined up, but now I have the energy to really look. Go for jobs that interest me and will be a better fit. I've never been more content and happy, even with not knowing what's next. Scary? Yes. Do I regret it? Not for a second. Story 130. Circa 2012, I had been reworking my resume. Told myself if I walk out today, I'm going home to upload it. I got a call within 45 minutes of uploading it to Indeed. Called in the next day for my interview. I never talked to them again and started a new job the following week. 2 weeks later, they called and asked if I was coming back. I laughed and hung up. Story 131. Left a successful career in car sales in 2022 because I was so burnt out and didn't see a sustainable future in that industry. Went corporate, and the steep initial pay cut, $60K I took, was worth having my weekends back. No longer being customer-facing, shorter commute, etc. I am one promotion away from closely matching my best year in car sales, and I am proud of myself for taking a risk. Story 132. I quit without a backup a couple years ago. It was scary at first, but I picked up freelance work, built new skills, and eventually landed a better job than the one I left. The biggest lesson I learned is that uncertainty feels terrifying, but it can push you to grow in ways stability never will. Story 133. I cashed out the $14K in my 401K, which floated me long enough to start attempt to hire job. It was a risk and a pay cut, but it worked out in the end pretty well. Stable job with coworkers and management that I get along with, plus all the overtime I want, and most of the overtime is voluntary. Story 134. Quit like a year ago in my guidance associate job. It's my first job, and man, it's a rough start since my employer didn't train me well. Had to left because I felt really stressed out RN, still looking for one while just doing side job on my bro's business. Other than that, I'm quite nervous since my license is expiring next year and I had to renew it. Story 135. A little less than 2 years ago, I put in my 2 weeks BC. I couldn't stand the transphobia anymore. I had 3 interviews in those 2 weeks and had a start date set for 2 weeks after my end date. Unfortunately, I was sick for half of it better pay, less responsibilities, 2 weeks more PTO, and tuition reimbursement if I go for my master's degree. Story 136. I moved across the country with my then fiance for her job. I went 6 months without a job, which was expected because we were only on that location temporarily. Then, the week we moved to our final location, I already had an interview lined up. I was unpacking boxes looking for my suit, ended up with a higher paying job, and have continued professional growth from there. Story 137. I quit 2 jobs without a backup plan. Similar scenarios. Was hanging by a thread. Not happy where I was. Started applying to places. Scheduled interviews for other companies. I snapped before I even went to these interviews and quit my jobs with hardly any notice. Unemployed for a few days. Go to the interviews. In both scenarios, this happened, I got lucky and got job offers. Story 138. An old coworker got wind I'd left. Told me how much greener the grass was at a longtime competitor. Last day was a Saturday. Monday, I started onboarding in the same industry with a different company that treats me exponentially better, and I'm still here today. Story 139. I quit one job that way. I was 18, had the flu, and my supervisor told me I couldn't go home. I was spending more time in the restroom throwing up than working. I grabbed my personal stuff and walked out. I picked up my paycheck the next week. Duck you, Clara. Oh, and I had a better job the next week after I was recovered. Story 140. As of this last January, negotiated staying on an extra month for a higher pay rate. If I had no direct contact with my boss to help transfer all his projects to new people, because it was obvious to anyone he didn't know what he was doing. I then spent a month applying and interviewing before a former coworker connected me with my current job. Story 141. My closest friend, whom I have known for 35 plus years, makes the most dollar in my friend group. He was laid off because his company decided it no longer wanted any remote workers, and his closest office was 100 miles away. The commute was not possible with 3 young children. He has been looking for employment for more than a year. It's rough out there. Story 142. In November of 2000, I decided I'd had enough and gave my notice. Figured that I could pick up another software development job closer to home with no more effort than throwing a dart at the internet. And everybody knows what happened in January 2001. Story 143. I was working in an IT cubicle and hated it. I had a little in savings and decided to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail. It completely changed my life. When I got back, I eventually chose to go back to grad school and ultimately got a PhD and a new career as a faculty member and researcher. I love my new life. Story 144. Enrolled in a coding bootcamp for 3 months, then spent the next 9 months after that applying for software developer jobs. I luckily landed one that I've been at for over a year now. I don't regret leaving my old job. It was toxic AF, and everyone I worked with either retired, got fired, or laid off within a few months of me leaving. Anyways, story 145. I took care of my newborn and toddler for 8 months and maximized time with my terminally ill father. A former boss approached me with a part-time job, which would allow me to still prioritize my dad. My dad passed 5 weeks into that job. Eventually, I went from part-time to full-time and am still at this company 4 years later. Story 146. I quit my job in Feb 2020, had plane tickets to Europe in May, canceled, ended up managing to get a job in Europe starting in the beginning of July, leaving a relatively pandemic-free NZ. Worked out fine, came back home after 4 hours abroad, never got pandemic, bought and sold a house and made a bunch of profit on it. No regrets. Story 147. I packed my bags and moved to the other side of the country. I sent my resume ahead to a few places on the day I left my hometown. And within 3 weeks of arriving in my new town, I got a job. 18 years later, and I'm still working at the same place. And I'm raising a family. Can't complain. Story 148. Did it twice. First time I visited family abroad and ended up staying 20 plus years. Second time I had planned to decompress for 6 months, but 3 days and a friend asked if I could cover a leadership role for someone on maternity, enticing me with some exposure to new tech for the resume. 12 years later, I'm still there. Story 149. Literally last week. Was so exhausted and miserable, working for the most toxic person fathomable, and just had to take the risk. I was either going to for sure be miserable at work or just maybe miserable because it would take a while to land something new and dip into my saving. Found contract work through my network immediately that pays more. Story 150. Left manual labor job with nothing lined up, eventually got a job as a receptionist at a school. Eventually, I moved laterally to overseeing financial aid, which led to a career in accounting. That was like 15 years ago, and career-wise, it has been fantastic. I never thought that lowly receptionist position would lead to a cushy six-figure career. Story 151. I'm about to do this. I'm going to substitute teach in the interim. Yes, I was made painfully aware of how that pays. Was still surprised to see it was less than the bus driver in the same district. We are a country, but I can still handle this moment. And I look forward to this experiment. Story 152. Took some time off to decompress and remove myself from the toxicity of the job, then took 7 months to find a new job. And that job sucked even more than my previous one, and I burned through my entire saving. But I eventually found something that I love. It just took way longer than I thought it would. Story 153. I went on a 2-month couch surfing vacation, visiting friends all over the country. Then I came back home and got another job. It was the 90s and I was working in it. I was making good money and had a good amount of savings. Also, I had multiple headhunters actively recruiting me, so jobs were easy to come by. Story 154. Worked at a terrible school. Admin was abusive to staff. No effort to rein in student behavior issues. Substances were common, etc. Told them in January that I'd finish the year, but wouldn't be back. Applied to jobs in the same field, got an offer within a couple of weeks, and an even better offer right after that. Story 155. Last time, spent nearly a year unemployed, but managed to find my way into a decent paying tech job with no relevant experience that granted me a middle-class lifestyle I never thought possible. I just submitted my notice after 9 years there. This time, I'm moving to another country, trying to change industries, and we'll see what's in store. Story 156. I quit my job as a BA at a software company due to stress, no plan at all. I started mowing lawns part-time and getting by. Happiest I've ever been. A year later, the company called me and made me a good offer to come back. Been back 2 years now and miserable again. Story 157. Still looking for work nearly 2 years later. To be fair, I was supposed to get a job earlier this year, but had a panic attack during the skills test at the job. So they sent me home, and a week later I broke my ankle. Even recovered from that now had made it difficult to find work. Story 158. I left a toxic job and was planning to take some time off. But on my last day of work, a former boss from another company called to see if I was interested in a contract position. I started the next week after jumping through the pre-employment hoops. Some time off would have been nice, but money talks. Story 159. I didn't quit but was fired and decided to then move to Los Angeles with zero prospects. Thankfully, I had some freelance projects to carry me through the first couple of months, but I definitely came close to having to go back home a few times. Next month is the 15-year anniversary of me moving here. Story 160. Built a freelance practice working approx 20 HRs a week for more money. No security or benefits, but stuck with it for 7 years before going corporate again. Story 161. Quit with no backup after a toxic manager. Week 1 felt amazing. Week 2 was panic. I grabbed temp shifts, leaned on my network, and landed a better job in 6 weeks. I'd only do it again with 2 to 3 months of savings and a fresh resume ready. Story 162. I did this in 2019. I quit effective immediately due to issues with management. I reached out to people in my network and had a job lined up within 2 weeks. While I do not suspect this strategy would be nearly as effective in today's market, the advice still stands. It's still about who you know. Story 163, left without a backup after burnout. Week 1 felt like freedom. Week 2 was, oh no. I grabbed temp gigs, pinged my network, and landed a better role in about a month. I'd only do it again with a few months of savings and health insurance sorted. Story 164. I once quit my job because my boss wouldn't let me use his private bathroom. I regretted it and spent the rest of the day at my friend's apartment musing about possible career paths. At one point, I was considering becoming the general manager of a baseball team. Story 165. I spent a week in the mental hospital and years later, found out that I was having a bad reaction to a medication that was kicking my anxiety up to 11. After that, I took a 2-week contract with a friend's company that ended up lasting 5 years. Story 166. Quit my job in November of 2020 due to burnout. Family moved 2 years later, and I haven't been able to find a new job since, despite trying. Not sure if it was the worst decision I've ever made or if the world really is just a crafty nowadays. Regardless, I would not recommend it. Story 167. Chilled out for 3 months to decompress from BS. Went and got hired at a new factory for 3 years. More pay, slightly better benefits. Factory went bankrupt. Took a year off to decompress. Severance pay helped. Started at new factory. Little pay cut, but better benefits. I'll be there for a year in Octi. Story 168. Multiple rage quitter here. None of my jobs were high stakes, so I always found something comparable within a month. Not this last time. Had to withdraw from the bank of mom and dad for the first time. Now I have my lowest paying job ever and feel lucky to even have that. Story 169. One semester towards the end of college, I was in a deep, depressed haze. My dad, who never liked my work environment much to begin with, encouraged me to quit my job. I kind of said okay, and very quickly after, snapped to, applied for, and got another job that paid about 15% better. Story 170. After I quit my job at KFC in 2003, I set out at 15 years old to build my own business. So I started selling substances and accessories. Did that for years, and now I have a family and quiet life working for the local municipal government in the next state over. Story 171. I left my job weeks before the pandemic. I proceeded to remain out of work for almost exactly 1 year. Fortunately, my current employer reached out via Indeed. I've worked remotely for them ever since. Story 172. I put on a collared shirt, found an industrial park with multiple businesses in my line of work, went from office to office, asking for a job, and got a job. BTW, this was 6 years ago, so everyone moaning about how it's so hard to find work are full of it. Story 173. A lot of people end up scrambling at first, but it usually pushes them to figure things out fast. Some pick up gig work like delivery or freelancing to cover basics while they search for something better. Others move back in with family for a short time to cut expenses and reset. Story 174. I literally just did this today. Went with the nuclear option and burned all those bridges. Insane to walk away from that kind of career and its stability and pay. But yeah, not sure what's next, but it will definitely be something that doesn't cause me to have daily panic attacks. Story 175. I've quit 4 jobs in a row this way, and longest I was out of work is a month this last time. Never regretted it much, but then again, I'm not a ladder climber. I found a niche I excel in to the point of being undeniable and believe in myself. Story 176. Did the stay-at-home dad thing for a few months, looked for a week or two and got a new job making 10 HR more doing the same thing. Was very stupid but got lucky and worked hard. Got 2 more raises since then. Been there a year and 3 months. Story 177. I packed a few things into my car, drove a few hours until I found a place I kind of liked and made that where I decided to live. Found some work and a cheap place to live after a while of sleeping outside and just went from there. Story 178. Last year, I quit my job and took 3 months off around the summer. It was the best time of my life. I lost weight and actually felt glad to be alive. I got another job in September of last year. I'm fat and depressed again. Story 179. That job was super stressful and I was just done. I had the cash set aside to take plenty of personal time. Another company contacted me a week after I left my job, offering twice my old salary and generous benefits. So much for the extended vacation. Story 180. I took a 3-week road trip all by myself, then came home and started job searching. My significant other has a decent job and my income was going to charitable causes. Now that the donations fund is getting significantly lower, I'm starting to ramp up my hunting. Story 181. Not me, but my then wife. I covered our expenses for the 2 months she was unemployed and the first 4 months of her new job. In the meantime, she cheated on me, asked for a divorce, and wrecked her car. Story 182. Living at ATM, been 2 months without work so far. Not much available during summer, but it has been nice to have a long summer. Might not have an income, but I've it better. Been working on my hobbies and doing what I want. Story 183. I quit my job because it was soul-crushing. I lived off my tax return for the next month and applied to jobs on Craigslist. I eventually got a job and stuck with it for a year and a half until going to grad school. Story 184. Done it 20 times in the last 10. I make crap, but I was able to find the ceiling for my skill level. $20 Midwest dollars, oh sure, I'd be comfy if I followed the have another job before you quit rule. Just hit Indeed before folding. Story 185. I resigned from my job after 24 years because I couldn't take it anymore. Wife was supportive, took a month off. An ex-coworker reached out a month later with an opportunity. I put together a 1-page resume, applied and got the job. Story 186. I always had a backup plan. In fact, when I get a job, I always get a backup plan going in case I have to quit the job for some reason or another. and I always renew the backup plan when things happen. Story 187. I took a 1-year vacation, made a startup company. I lived off of my savings. This was back during pandemic and my job was stressful. I would 100% do it again if I was in the same situation. Story 188. I found a part-time job 2 months later. That part-time job turned into a 6-year contract and I just signed for a full-time permanent offer. I got extremely lucky mixed in with a lot of hard work. Story 189. I hiked the 2,198.4 miles on the Appalachian Trail for 5 months and 3 weeks. Took a month off to recover and applied for new jobs. Got one in a few weeks. I work in hospitality if that makes a difference. Story 190. I was unemployed for 4 months until I got a job at Target. Did that for 6 months, then got a software sales job. Those 4 months were very rough. I was fresh out of college with nothing but bills. Story 191. Quit job cleaning fish, moved 60 kilometers away, unemployed for 2 years dealing with some medical stuff, got a job in medicine as an assistant, making 25% more than I did then. Benefits, full-time, best choice I ever made. Story 192. Chances are, was a bad workplace. Did that, got a new, better paid, more senior position within 3 weeks, only did around 4 interviews, and I'm thriving in it. Career-wise, it's the best choice I ever made, so far. Story 193. It was somewhat easy to find a job, but the older I got, the less risky I became. So now, no matter the BS, I am staying at this job until retirement, or if I hit the lottery. Story 194. Quit my manual labor job in December 2019 because I was beyond my limit of bullcrap after 4 years. Found a job in it February 2019. Then the pandemic hit in March, and they had us work from home. Story 195. I quit for my mental health. I make significantly less money. I have a longer commute, and my mental health isn't better. I absolutely should not have quit, and I regret it every day. This was 3 years ago. Story 196. I started taking classes like singing, guitar, etc., then started helping my dad. Don't make as much money as I used to, but have been pretty happy. I feel like the guy in Office Space that went on to Construction Story 197. I sent applications to different places as I was writing my resignation letter. Got a call 15 minutes after giving the letter to the crafty manager, went to the interview, got the job. I've been working there ever since. Story 198. This was about 2 years ago, but I went on vacation, visited family that I hadn't seen in a while, got medicated, got into a relationship, and found a new and much better job, all within 3 months. Story 199. I've hit my breaking point so many times, but have not received any invitations for interview for roles I believe I'm qualified. Worst case, I pick up a couple part-time gigs and maybe go back to school. Story 200. Spent time with my newborns for 3 months, Akati deck, and got another job in January that paid better. Benefits of being in an in-demand field in a city where importing foreigners isn't viable because of insane rent, Sydney, Australia. Story 201. Became a broke alcoholic and had to move back in with my mom. Took me about 6 months to get my crap together and find a job. I've been at that job for 14 years now.